Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, the colorful human history of the Galapagos Islands, presented by Annie Van Dinther and Josy Cardozo. Josy has been guiding for NatHab in the Galapagos since 2005, and Annie is our guide development director, leading trips for NatHab since 1999. Thanks for being here, ladies. Annie, I'll hand things over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Kendall. Appreciate your help. And thank you to everyone who is joining us today. We absolutely love that you're checking in with us daily to learn so many different amazing things. As Kendall said, I'm our guide development director, and I had the awesome opportunity to guide in the Galapagos years ago. So when I knew this webinar was coming up, I wanted to continue to learn about this place that I had been 20 years ago. And so I immediately thought of Josy, and I'm so happy to have this special guest with us today. She's going to teach us so many things, and hopefully we'll get some more insight into this incredible place. Josy?
Hello, everybody. Nice to have you here in this webinar. Thank you, Annie. 20 years seems like a long, long time ago. And let me tell you, things have not changed that much, which is thumbs up here in the Galapagos. If you come again, you'll see exactly the same animals, and well, the history hasn't changed either. So that's what we're going to talk about today, flying through heaven and hell in the Galapagos Islands. So we hope you are going to enjoy all these next hour with us.
Fantastic. And with that, Josy, let's get started. I remember learning, of course, about the animals when I was guiding there and teaching folks about that. But I remember, and when I talked to you about doing this, this webinar, some really interesting human history. It's not just the animals that are, shall we say, sort of have this exotic, wild, awesome past. I mean, there's so many different people who have come and gone from this place. So let's have at it. Let's learn about this area.
Sure, Annie. It's actually very interesting, the whole story, the human history of the Galapagos Islands, and you're going to be amazed of all the information and the funny legends that actually true legends based here on the islands. And let's start it with who discovered the Galapagos Islands. Actually, the Galapagos Islands were discovered in 1535 by a bishop, a Spanish bishop called Fray Tomás de Berlanga. This bishop, as you know, the Spaniards were coming all the way to the New World, conquering Mexico, all Central America, South America, and one of the toughest part was the Inca Empire. So Fray Tomás de Berlanga was going from Panama, sailing on his boat all the way to Peru to solve some problems, because he was starting having some problems with Francisco Pizarro and his lieutenants. So as Fray Tomás de Berlanga was sailing to Peru, they didn't know that the equator line, you get the doldrums, and it's an area without any wind. So at that time, there were no engines, of course, you know, and the boat was dragged all the way to the Galapagos Islands. And that's how, by mistake, they discovered the island. And Fray Tomás de Berlanga was the first one to document it, you know, that it was these pieces of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And also he was already telling the king of Spain at that time how docile the animals were and how harsh the environment was. So he already noticed that, and he also sent those news back to Spain. So that Annie is who actually discovered the islands in 1535. We think there was people before that, but there is no documentation. So I'm sorry, the Spanish bishop gets the prize, right? The recognition of being the first one to document this archipelago.
That's amazing, and it's very interesting that there's not archaeological history of an indigenous group of people. We, of course, make this mistake often in our language where we say, well, this was discovered at this point, but so often it was discovered by, you know, European people or more modern civilizations, but there was an indigenous culture there. So here in the Galapagos, that was not happening. It does make a little bit of sense given the extreme location.
Yes, actually, that's another very important point that you mentioned, Annie, because I think we were lucky first not to have indigenous people before the 1535, because otherwise we will not have all the animals that are until nowadays. So the preservation of this ecosystem, it's due to the late colonization that the islands had. So yeah, no indigenous people were here on the islands prior all the discovery in 1535.
I hadn't thought about that with the animals, but that's an excellent point. It would be a completely different place had it been occupied by humans for a longer amount of history. So what are we looking at here? This is the map I see.
Yes, yes, this map, you know, the islands, as we're going to fly through heaven and hell in these 45 minutes, you're going to see that the maps have changed. Okay, according as the time passed, they got more accurate and accurate. And also the maps changed, the name of the islands had to change too. So you're going to sometimes find that one island has up to 8 names. So that was according to the people that was visiting the islands, and according to them, they name it, right? So we have Spanish names, we have English names, and we're going to see all through this presentation. But the map of that we're seeing now, it's the first map that also documented the Galapagos Islands. As you can see where I have the 2 arrows, they did a drawing of 2 separate bunch of islands. That was the Galapagos Islands in the map that was done by Gerardus Mercator in 1570. So that's the first time that our islands happened to appear in a world map, Annie, at that time, but totally different from what we're going to see in the next slide.
Okay, so who else was passing through this area?
Yeah, actually these islands, after they were discovered by the bishop, they were visited, very and highly visited, by pirates and buccaneers. Those were the first people using the Galapagos Islands. And why we're saying using? Because these pirates, or well, privateers or buccaneers, operated by the tacit support of England, France, and Holland. So these boats with these people on board, their main goal was to drain all the power and all the gold and all the precious things from the Spaniards. So the islands, we're going to see it later on the map, but just imagine they are in the same line as Ecuador, just 1,000 kilometers away, or 600 nautical miles. And the routes that the Spaniard boats were using actually made the Galapagos Islands to be strategically located. So the pirates used to go to the Galapagos Islands to hide, right? Then they were seeking for food. And of course, they had plenty of tortoises. That was actually the first thing that they were collecting. They could have the tortoises on board of their ships with up to a year without giving them food and water. So it was an excellent deal for these people. And also a little bit of fresh water, little bit, but it was enough for these privates and these buccaneers. And also, unfortunately, we think they are the first ones that left the rats here. It's one of our most invasive species nowadays, the rats, and they come since the pirate time. And then, you know, they were using it as a place to hide and to get food, but they were close enough to intercept and go back to the Spaniard boats. So that's why they were using the Galapagos Islands over here at the pirate time. And we think they took more than 100,000 tortoises just in the pirate time, you know, for food and also for oil.
Wow, that is an enormous amount. I'm putting you on the spot here, but what is the current population of tortoises on the island thought to be, roughly?
Well, before, let's imagine, before all these people arrived, the pirates, buccaneers, according to estimations, you know, a rough number could be 500,000 tortoises, okay? And then we had the pirates arriving, taking a whole bunch of tortoises, and the estimations, of course, saying, you know, how big the boats were, on the logs how many tortoises were taken per boat and things like that. We estimate that just the pirates took 100,000 tortoises.
Wow, that's incredible. It is very resourceful of them to have fresh meat for the whole year.
Yes.
So who do we have here?
Yeah, and and didn't having to feed the animals. So the pirates occupied, or they were using our islands since 1620s to the 1720s. And here we have, as I was telling you before, the second map of the Galapagos Islands. And you see that it's completely different. Now all the islands are all together, right, on the same area. And this map was done by Ambrose Conley. So the guys that we have here in this screen are one of the most renowned or famous pirates that were passing by. So we had William Dampier coming with Ambrose Conley to the Galapagos Islands. Okay, they were first visiting here, and after their visit, Ambrose Conley updated the chart and drew the Galapagos map. Then William Dampier came again under the command of Captain Wood Rogers. But before arriving to the Galapagos Islands, they passed and rescued Alexander Selkirk. He is considered the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe. He was rescued on Juan Fernandez Island before coming to the Galapagos. So, we have William Dampier, we have Ambrose Conley, we have Wood Rogers, Alexander Selkirk, that were visiting at that time our land here, and of course getting tortoises. Actually, what is more interesting is that William Dampier is the first one that coined the word sea lion. He was all the records and all the logs that he wrote, it's under the vision of a naturalist. And after coining the word sea lion, he also coined another 1,000 words for the language, for English language, actually. So he was like you and me, right? As a naturalist. We're in the modern time, right? Except for the pirate part. But yeah, he was a very, very interested in nature.
Can you imagine living in an era when you can discover so much? It's just amazing. I mean, we still have a lot to discover about our oceans, but whole island systems, it must have been phenomenal to be visiting there with all of those tortoises. Now here we're looking at a picture of a whale. I used to research whales in the Cape Cod area, and it was said pre-whaling that people could walk across the bay on the backs of whales, that they were that abundant. Were there a lot of whales in the Galapagos area?
Yes, actually, Annie, they were. And that's why after the pirates and buccaneers left, the second people that arrived to the Galapagos Islands were the whalers. And as you know, when the whale population in the Atlantic depleted so much, the whalers went into the expeditions to the Pacific Ocean, right, to look for them. Because at that time, that was how they were, actually, they were collecting the oil from these animals. So we had famous whalers arriving to the islands, and the first expeditions that came here were sponsored by a company that is called Samuel Enderby and Sons. That was a British whaling company, and that happened to be in roughly 1788, more or less. That expedition came, explored the Pacific in order to know and send back news whether it was worth it or not. But at that time, that only single expedition took 140 tons of whale oil, plus 888 seals, because also was the sealer time, right? I mean, they were kind of, okay, we get these, let's start also collecting these other. So 888 seals were also taken. And later on, of course, we had Nantucket fleet also arriving to the Pacific, you know. And then with these whalers, we have Captain James Colnett. he is a very important guy that passed by. He was in one of these whaling ships, and Captain Colnet, we give the how do you say he really needs to be named in the human history of the Galapagos. When he came here, he established our post office barrel on Floriana Island. Okay, but that we're going to talk a little bit later about the whales, and it was a sperm whales. Why he came all the way to the Galapagos Islands? We have the Humboldt current coming from the south, bringing very cold water. You know, Humboldt current is one of the most important currents in terms of amount of nutrients and how high in productivity it happens to be. So whales come all the way to the Galapagos, even western from the Galapagos, to reproduce and also to eat, because near to the islands gets so deep, there is a nice feeding area, and all that due to the Humboldt current that comes all the way from Antarctica up and then turns left to the Galapagos Islands. So that's why it was an abundance of sperm whales for these whalers here.
That's a major score for the whales. I mean, there's not many places where whales can migrate for birthing and calving and also eat. That's incredible. It's unique.
Yeah, as you know, when you and me, we guide in Baja, the whales go to Baja, to San Ignacio Lagoon, just for giving birth. And the breeding area is far, far, far away. So here is both things pretty much in the same area. So also these whalers took with them another 100,000 tortoises. So with that, how many have been taken already? 200,000 tortoises, right? From the islands. And also tortoises for oil, and also tortoises for food. And our seal population too. You know, we have the Galapagos sea lion and the fur seal. So the fur seal almost got into extinction due to this period of time. So good news is that we still have them. They're in a good stage nowadays, because later on, of course, the whalers, happy for us because we scored, and they left when they discovered another area in 1819 that is the northwest of Japan, where whales were more abundant over there. So when they found out about the northwestern side of Japan, they left from the Galapagos Islands looking for other grounds to get the whales. So that's actually the next set of people coming to the islands after the pirates.
Okay, tell us about this, because this doesn't look like it has to do with whaling, but it does.
Yeah, actually, it has to be with Captain Colnet, right? That he came here, and on that time, those ships were years and years away from port, away from home, right? It was not like, oh, I'm going on board for 2 weeks and then I'm coming back. No, they were by, and I don't know when I'm coming back. Sometimes it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, who knows? So Captain Colnet said, okay, how are we going to communicate between the British fleet of whalers? And he said, let's leave this barrel, like the one that you are seeing in the photo that is post office box. So we leave our letters there for the other British ships. So we communicate with each other. And also, it doesn't matter which whaling ship was going back home, he will take news back home. So it was a post office, a very sophisticated post office working already on the Galapagos Island, and cost $0, right? No stamps needed. And until nowadays, we do have the post office, and that's actually one of the sites that we visited when you come in on a cruise on the Galapagos Islands. Of course, depending the itinerary, Floriana is very famous because of the post office barrel. And this barrel, of course, it put in a lot of trouble, because then we had Captain David Porter coming to the islands. And also it was a US, it came in the US frigate Essex that was also a whaling boat. So David Porter came here and found the post office box, and he was able to read all the communication that the British ships were having. And at that time, as you know, they were fighting with each other. The British fleet with the US fleet, they were not getting along. So David Porter made his whaling fleet bigger by capturing the English boats due to sneaking in the British cards, letters, right? Sneaking into the post office box. And that's how David Porter make all the fleet bigger, and he was able to hunt and kill a lot of whales. Also, we think that with the whalers, it's the first time that we got goats and pigs. That's another introduced species on the islands that it's very devastating for our flora and competing with other animals since the whaler time. So that's a little bit of the story of the whalers. Imagine that.
It's incredible. And it's, of course, quite strategic for Captain Porter to be looking in those places. I mean, it would be really hard not to. You see this communication there, and like, you would be very curious, I would think. And here we have that this area is related to Moby Dick. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, actually, the islands have inspired, all this whaling time and the whalers arriving here have inspired to different movies or books. So we have Moby Dick. It's actually by Herman Melville, right? And the thing is that it says that it was this huge sperm whale, right, that wanted to get revenge, and it was able to crash and sunk one of the whalers' boat. And that's actually how Moby Dick comes to be one of the books. And then not only Moby Dick, but also In the Heart of the Seas. That's a very interesting documentary that I highly recommend to see to all of you. And it talks about the whaling boats arriving to mainland Ecuador, Peru, Ecuador, that area, and they're saying, no, go west, because in the western side is where you are going to find the most amount of whales, and western side happens to be the Galapagos Islands. So these islands have inspired not only pirates, whalers, but also books about it.
Wow, that's fantastic. And so do we have more whalers? Oh no, we're up to Patrick Watkins. This is fascinating.
Yes, at that time, whalers, as I mentioned, they discovered in the northwestern part of Japan. So they moved from here. And also later on, Annie, remember that they discovered the oil, right? So that actually is what it saves a little bit our whales that we can enjoy nowadays. So pirates and buccaneers named the islands, and a lot of the islands have the name of lieutenants, the name of captains, the name of sailors, the name of the European high society, the nobility. So that's why some of the islands are named in English, as you can see in this chart. Albemarle, Abingdon Tower, people that were sailing through the islands. And the chart keeps changing. The map of the Galapagos Island keeps improving as time passes by. But now we start entering into the, who really stayed here on the islands, because all these people were passing by, just staying here, collecting tortoises for food, maybe getting a little bit of water, and let's move on. But Patrick Watkins, we don't know that much about him, but he's considered the first settler that stayed for a couple of years here. Yes, Patrick Watkins started in 1805 and left in 1809. He came, his boat got marooned all the way to the Galapagos Islands. And here is where the mystery started, because he started and settled on Floriana Island. From now on, you are going to hear about Floriana and about San Cristobal, because these are the only two islands that have fresh water, okay? The only islands that have fresh water. All the other islands, we have brackish water and we have to do desalination process in order to be able to drink that water. So Patrick Watkins ended up on Floriana, maybe because the post office barrel was there, who knows. And the interesting fact about him is that he was able to go back to Guayaquil in 1809 with a ship with more people, but he arrived alone. So people starts disappearing. And here's when things start getting creepy in the Galapagos Islands, because all the, I'm going to tell you next about all who murders and people disappearing and all that. So that's a little bit about the first settler. But the islands are not yet part of Ecuador, Annie. There's
Okay.
no one is the owner.
Okay, and it seems like Patrick wasn't there by choice, right? He was marooned, so he was stuck there. What about these guys? Did they go there by choice?
Actually, these guys are the first president of Ecuador, because we're not yet that far ahead in history. The islands became part of Ecuador in 1832. The guy that you see with the blue band, he was the first president of Ecuador, Juan José Flores. And the guy with the next to him is José María de Villamil. And José María de Villamil was an entrepreneur. He was actually a business guy. So he started financing a feasibility project in order to make money out of the Galapagos Islands in 1831. So due to him talking to the president, he was saying, I want to be able to go and make money from those islands that are over there. What about if also you claim those islands in order to be part of Ecuador? So due to that, it's how the islands became part of Ecuador, okay? And the first people that was sent to the islands, guess to which island? Floriana, of course, were people that failed on a coup. They were trying to do a coup on the mainland. So those soldiers were sent as a punishment to Floriana Island. So that's how we became part of Ecuador.
So they were banished because of a coup.
Yes. I mean, they were sent. They were part of the coup. They wanted to defeat the president. So as a punishment, said, okay, you are going to the islands, right? Because it's hard conditions, isolation, and you're going to be there without bothering us here in the mainland.
So more people who are established in this area who don't actually want to be there.
Exactly. That's pretty much the case at the beginning, okay? At the beginning, because then we have people that wanted to make money, and that's how they start colonizing the islands. So, also, it's very important to know that the feasibility study that was conducted by Villamil, it was in order to find out how much lichen. We have a lichen, the organism that grows on the rock. There is the symbiotic relationship of an algae and a fungus.
Yes.
And they form the lichen because they have to lichen each other. Otherwise, there's no lichen, right? And that lichen, we call them dire moss, which is confusing because it's a lichen, right? But it's called dire moss. It's in order to dye fabric. So he wanted to make money out of getting the lichen out in order to dye fabric in the mainland.
Wow.
José de Villamil. Yes.
That's amazing. I don't usually think of lichen as, something that would be very color producing. I mean, there's a few bright colors. I can think of some from different areas, but they're typically kind of, I don't know, green and pale.
Yeah, but in that case, our indigenous people from the mainland, not from Galapagos, from the mainland, that's how they used to do the tapestries.
Okay.
Before, right? Long time. They used to use a lot of lichens, a lot of aphids, and a lot of seeds, and also pieces of wood. They have strong dyes and different colors that you cannot imagine. So that's how our indigenous in mainland Ecuador did their tapestries and how they
That's
paint.
fascinating.
Mhm.
And so now this guy we're looking at here, I think is probably one of the most famous gentlemen in the history of the Galapagos. And of course, for us naturalists, this guy is very, very interesting. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, as all of you may know or recognize him, I wanted to put a photo of Charles Darwin when he was young, because most of the photos that we have about him is him being old with a huge, long, white beard, right? But when Darwin was in the Galapagos Island, he was in his 20s. Okay, so he was very, very young. So he was one of the most important visitors until nowadays. Charles Darwin was part of the expedition of the Beagle with Captain Fitzroy. Captain Fitzroy had to chart the South American coast, including the Galapagos Islands. So that's why Darwin went with him on the boat as the naturalist on board. In all of his voyage, Darwin was very into geology and he had a keen eye. But also in the way he was collecting animals. He really liked animals, but he was very into geology. So they passed by here from September to October. They stayed about almost 5 weeks, visiting 4 islands. They enter by by our eastern side. That is San Cristobal. Then they went to Floriana, Santiago, and Isabela, and then they went back home. So Charles Darwin was able to collect here a lot of Darwin finches, of course, a lot of mockingbirds. And as I always like to say to my groups, there is nothing wrong in getting seasick. Me, I get seasick all the time when it's rough oceans. Charles Darwin got seasick all the time too. So if he did it, we can get seasick as well. So that's why he took advantage of most of the time that he was able to do it to go on land. He hated to be on board. Plus, his relationship with Fitzroy was not the best because of Darwin's idea and Fitzroy beliefs. So Darwin said, I'm happy on land and I'm going to look into my geology that I love it and all the nature and all the animals, and pick me up before you leave. So that's how Darwin was going around the islands. And thanks to him, later on, it's not actually in 1835, later on when he published his book, the islands became more famous. Actually, the islands got to be known all over the world. So that's about Darwin in the Galapagos.
Wow. And certainly I would say that his work remains one of the biggest draws for people to go there and see all of the adaptations that he was describing in his work. I mean, to this day, it's one of the things that's so fascinating about the islands, of course.
Exactly. So he was one of our most renowned visitors, staying only 4 weeks. Imagine that, staying only 4 weeks.
Wow,
And
he
then,
had an enormous amount of information in a very short time.
Yeah,
amazing.
Totally. Classification of all his knowledge, right? Of all the baggage that he was carrying with him.
Wow. So who came after him?
So, after Darwin, we had Patrick Watkins, that crazy guy trying to stay for 4 years, and then the soldiers that were sent to Floriana. But basically, we had 3 guys, again, entrepreneur people trying to become a millionaire in the 1800s in the Galapagos. So we have Mr. J. Cobos, Manuel J. Cobos. We have, and 2 other guys, Valdizan and Monroy. These 3 guys formed a company and were granted permission or permit to get lichens. Again, we go to the lichen part, right? That the guy in 1832 wanted to also make money out of it. So these 3 guys form a company, got a 12 years lease in order to exploit lichen here in the Galapagos on Floriana Island, of course, because of the fresh water. And lichen is the little photo that you have at the bottom. And those are the colors that you get from the lichen that we have here in the Galapagos. But that business failed later on, because one of the guys died, and then Manuel J. Cobos decided to go to San Cristobal Island. And because the Lycon company failed later on, and one of the reasons why they failed, Annie, is because they discovered the same Lycon in Baja California, where we go and guide with the whales. And it was easy access and a lot more. So why bothering, getting the Lycon in the Galapagos? It was going to be way too expensive by the time that arrives to the mainland. Plus, synthetic dyes came out. So it was not a point of getting natural dyes that's so hard to collect them and so long to process, and at the end it's expensive, right? So synthetic dyes and Lycon also in Baja California made this company fail. But one of the guys said, I'm not ready to go to the mainland. I'm going to another island, San Cristobal, that is the capital of Galapagos, and I will build a sugar empire over there. So he planted a lot of sugar canes, produced a lot of sugar, and with him, he had a lot of people working there. But he was not a good guy. He was actually kind of a dictator. He used to print his own money, his own coins. He was the owner of the stores that was selling supplies to his workers. So he would pay his workers, and then the money would go back to him because the workers were buying the things that they need to survive. But of course, revenge took place, and the people from his sugar empire killed him in 1904. So that was it about the sugarcane company and business that was on San Cristobal Island.
That is also amazing to me that, there's a lot of easier places to grow sugarcane, but having been to the Galapagos, it's such an incredibly beautiful place. I can see why he was committed to wanting to do whatever business would be successful there.
Yes. So because in the mainland, we have a lot of sugarcane plantations, right? And it's easier, as you say. But I think it was this spirit of adventure of people also to try to be alone and make money, and who knows, become more successful on an isolated area. So after, also while these people was on San Cristobal, we have Antonio Hill going to Isabela Island. In one of those red arrows that you have in front of you, the biggest island is called Isabela. So Antonio Hill went there in 1893, and he went there and was making money out of collecting and exporting sulfur, lime, and tortoises meat and oil. So that was the colonization on Isabela, and actually the Hill family stayed there until nowadays. So that was one of the first successful families that really stayed there until nowadays. And then we had the Norwegians arriving in 1925, and the Norwegians went to Santa Cruz in order to establish a canning company. They were canning turtles, lobsters, and grouper. And again,
wow.
in order to sell it to the mainland. And the Norwegians stay here on Santa Cruz. Their business of canning didn't last that long because the whole factory, boom, exploded. And then they just stayed here. And most of our Norwegian families that live here, there's already several generations, they are into the milk dairy business. They're doing yogurt and cheese and all that. So that's the other people arriving at that time, in 1893, 1925 to Isabela and Santa Cruz.
Wow, that's a long way from Norway. Completely different ecosystem. Now, this picture is very interesting to me because this is the story that you're about to share with us, that even after 20 years, I said to you, I remember there's some pretty dramatic history that I learned about when I was there, and I wanted to learn more about these Germans.
Yes, and as I always said to all my guests, I'm not that good at history. I kill people ahead of time and I mix them with the wrong ones. So that's my version of the story, after reading the books of the human history of the Galapagos. But so far, people, I haven't killed anyone before time. So you're in good hands for the moment. And we have the Germans, and I always call them the crazy Germans. Again, Annie, far away from home, yeah? Germany is not around the corner. So in that period, why the Germans came here, it's because of information of scientific expeditions. So we're going to talk about scientific expeditions after, I think, the crazy Germans. But they got aware of Galapagos due to these naturalists passing by and writing how beautiful and how interesting the flora happened to be on the island. But let me tell you and introduce to you Dr. Ritter and Dora. They were looking for paradise. And also, Floriana history, we can do it a whole entire webinar. So this is going to be a brief summary of what happened there. They were looking for paradise. They decided to come all the way to the Galapagos Islands. They were supposed to have each one its spouses, and they were cheating on their spouses, and then they organized a party to put their spouses together so they will not feel that guilty because they were leaving Germany and coming all the way to paradise. And before coming to paradise, they decided to remove all their teeth, because on the islands, it was not going to be any dentist. They were going to be the only ones on Floriana Island. Again, Floriana, because of the little spring of fresh water. So that's how Dr. Ritter and Dora ended up on Galapagos Islands, on Floriana. They wanted to be left alone. He was a philosopher, so he wanted inspiration to come, being surrounded by nature. They wanted to be naked around the islands. And for some years, they were very happy because they were looking for paradise, right? So I guess they were picturing this beautiful landscape as they were sailing from Germany all the way to mainland Ecuador, and from mainland Ecuador all the way to the Galapagos. But paradise didn't last that long, because we have a second party arriving to Floriana, and it's the Beaver family. And the Beaver family was also tired of being in Germany. It's all the Germans were getting out of there. And they said, okay, let's go to the Galapagos Islands. We have heard there is a doctor on Floriana Island. So what about going there? Actually, Margarita was pregnant she was a roll on her and Hein. So they were already with one kid and one in the way, arriving to Floriana Island. When they arrived to Floriana Island, the Dr. Ritter and Dora didn't like them, of course, because they wanted to be left alone on that huge island. So they were not welcome at all. And Dr. Ritter said, we hate you, we don't like you here. And now that you're here, please go far away. We don't want to see you, just go to the highlands. So they were sent to the highlands to have their own piece of land there. And that's where actually they can do a little bit of agriculture. Highlands in Galapagos doesn't go above than, in Santa Cruz, about 800 meters. That would be 2,400 feet. So that's what we call highlands. So the Beaver family was living there with the Ritter family, and they were kind of getting along. Far away from each other, they don't see, so who cares? Until that's what we call highlands. And we have an area that has enough moisture to grow pineapples, it's green and lush, a lot of trees. So that's what we call highlands, okay? It's not the same highlands as in the mainland with those huge mountains. We don't have that over here. Until the Baroness came to Floriana. And the Baroness was this lady from Austria that called herself the Baroness. And she wanted to be the owner of the whole island, to build a 5-star hotel for rich Americans. That was his idea when he arrived to Floriana. But it's very funny because she arrived with 3 guys. They are supposed to be their lovers. So when she arrived to Ecuador, she had 2 Europeans. And before sailing all the way to Floriana, of course, she needed the macho Latino, the Latin guy involved. So she got a 3rd lover with her going to Floriana. So they were taking turns. One day was the Ecuadorian had the hard labor, working the land. The other one had to wash the dishes and so on. But that's when things start getting creepy, because one of the lovers disappear, the Baroness die. And why is that? Because the Ritters hate the Widmers hate the Baroness hate everybody hate each other. So there is mystery and murder on this island. The Baroness is gone. Until nowadays, we don't know who killed her. One of the lovers died. The other one was able to escape. Dr. Ritter died, and he was poisoned by a chicken, and he was supposed to be a vegetarian, so we don't know who poisoned him. And Dora, that was Dr. Ritter's wife, ended up on a mental institution back in Germany. Of course, after all that, even me, I will be not good of my brain. And then the Beaver family is the last family to be successful there. And until nowadays, they live here. Some part of the family lives in Floriana, some other part here in Santa Cruz. They started also tourism business, so they have nice boats in order to take you around the islands, and they're a very good known and very nice family. And the Widmers are the survivors of this Floriana crazy story, Annie.
Wow, that is incredible. This Baroness is fascinating to me. I'm gonna have to go look her up. I mean, a woman at that time who's gonna own property and start this hotel, bringing several lovers with her. It's a fascinating story, that's for sure. But at the same time, I mean, they got there because of information about the scientific expeditions, and those continued, right?
Yes, actually, the scientific expeditions were going by the Galapagos, and we have the Royal Society, the Zoological Society of London, we have the British Museum, we have Harvard University, we have the Smithsonian Institute, we have, and the last one, and the most famous one is the California Academy of Science. They were passing by here, and they stayed a good whole year. And they are the ones that have the most amazing collection of Galapagos Islands, of the Galapagos animals. They have about 76,000 specimens collected from the islands at that time in 1905. So, at this time now we say, oh my gosh, how are you going to kill that many animals, right? But at that time, that was the only way to communicate people, and that was the only way to teach people, collect the animals, stuff them, and put them on a museum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those scientific expeditions passed by the Galapagos Islands for decades and make the Galapagos Islands to be very famous all over the world. So that's, with all these expeditions passing by.
Wow, and that's really established a culture there that is still going on today, right? Of research and understanding all of these beautiful animals and their adaptations.
Exactly, yeah. Well, with the tortoises, there is also a very successful story of restoration after the pirates and buccaneers and whalers took away from them. And then we have information before it was declared national park due to these scientific expeditions. We have information about tortoises, of all the species that were here due to this information. So it was not all bad. Actually, it was the proper thing to do at that time. And thanks to them, we know the stage of how the flora and fauna happened to be in the Galapagos before it was declared national park.
Wow, that's fantastic. And that wasn't the only reason that people at this time were visiting. We have a whole other group of people, yes?
Yes, actually, the islands were also a military base from US, but in the Second World War. But the interest of United States of being here in the Galapagos happened since the First World War. But between the two governments, they never got into agreement. US wanted to lease the islands for 99 years, $15 million at that time, but never happened. And later on, actually, it was rented. Baltra Island, that is one of the two main airports that we have here. The US Air Base established in 1942 until 1949, and it was around 2,400 soldiers from the US here. And when the war was over, one of the main reasons it was in order to control Panama Canal. You know, that was the main objective. So they put a base on Central America, another based on Galapagos, and the other based on mainland Ecuador. So they will form this kind of triangle thing in order to protect the area of Panama Canal. So that was a strategic location why they established and settled the bases here in Galapagos and Ecuador. After the war was done, they left, and most of the wood, you know, of the houses that they had on Baltra Island were taken to Santa Cruz for the first, first or second or third settlers. At that time, there was not many people living there. So that wood was used to build the first homes in Galapagos.
Wow. Wow. So now we have the park created, correct?
Yes. After the US, we had people moving to the islands due to a big earthquake in the mainland that caused a big immigration of finally Ecuadorians, you know, regular Ecuadorians. They were not people trying, Ecuadorian soldiers or people trying to do coups or convicts or people trying to become a millionaire. They were just regular Ecuadorians looking for a place to establish after they lost a lot of their stuff in the mainland. So that's when we have people from mainland Ecuador coming here. And a little bit after that, the national park was created in 1959 and declared human heritage in 1978. In that time, also we had the Darwin Research Station established here on the islands, and scientists start coming here in order to do their research.
Wow, fantastic. That's an early time. Were there other national parks formed in Ecuador at that same time, or was this unique to the Galapagos?
This was the first Ecuadorian national park created. Later on, we had other parks, but this was the first, you know, the first. And I think we're lucky because that gave a lot of protection and, and a lot of power in order for us to manage how we wanted to take care of it since very early, because a lot of people had interest. You know, scientific expeditions later on, the US, for sure other countries, but since very early, it says, no, this is a national park, 97% is protected and no one can do anything here. You know, forget about your entrepreneur ideas and doing whatever you want, because this is going to be a protected area. Due to all the scientific information that was given and knowing there was a very fragile place.
And that does have a lot to do with why we can still go there today and see such phenomenal animals. But tourism has been going on for a long time.
Yes, actually tourism started in the 60s, Annie, on a cruise boat. That's how tourism started here. And some of you that are maybe watching this webinar, you've been already here in Puerto Ayora and you've been visiting our lovely town. And that photo there is our old pier, our old main pier, when people was barely getting to the Galapagos Islands to live, to Santa Cruz. So tourism started, and nowadays is one of the best and the most restricted national parks. The regulations are very strict. And that's how we can keep it pristine, and we can have people enjoying as if you are alone in nature. You know, we don't have that mass tourism, and it's very regimented, and we have a lot of regulations and a lot of rules which help us to protect the natural conditions, but also give the best experience ever to the guests.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful area. So after this, where are we now? Tell us about how are things in the Galapagos today?
Yes, after all this time, we have about 30,000 people on the islands, and most of us, we work directly for tourism, and that's one of the lessons that we have learned, of course, hard now with this pandemic with COVID virus affecting tourism. You know, tourism industry is the first one to be affected. And right now, all the young people, you know, people of maybe my age, all the way back, the new generations are very into protecting this ecosystem. With that being said, it's not that you know, whoever is ahead of me, they were not taking care, because actually they did take care. That's how the environment is as it is. But right now we're focusing also in order to have other industries and not to only depend on tourism, because as we can see, everything is stopped here, you know, zero income. So maybe we're looking into agriculture, maybe some fisheries, maybe some exporting wood. So we're learning. It has been a tough time, but learning for the future in order to have other resources, but also in a sustainable way. That's the most important part, because we know we have to protect this fragile ecosystem.
So, you know, we've heard of a lot of places that are more vulnerable because tourism is not happening. And therefore, you know, there maybe is more poaching happening, other wildlife trafficking, that sort of thing. Is that something you worry about in the Galapagos, that without tourism established, maybe there will be more illegal fishing or something like that?
And yes, actually tourism is a very important, because it also helps to bring money for conservation as any other place. The good thing here is that in town we don't have any poaching of, for example, marine turtles, the eggs. But what we're very afraid is that the illegal fishing done by international industrial fishing boats is sneaking on our marine reserve. Even though the national park has kept patrolling, you know, all this time, all these almost 3 or 4 months that were closed, it's patrolling in order to make sure no illegal fishing boats are coming in. But the tourism boats help a lot, you know, because it's guides. We are the wardens of the national park as well. So we keep an eye of illegal activities and we report it right away. And then our main fear, it's what about if we totally run out of money? When people runs out of money and you have $0 to go and buy food, guess what people is going to do? I mean, it's not because you want, it's because it's, or you go and eat whatever happens to be walking around, or you die, right? Yeah. So we hope we don't get to that stage. We hope all these problems are going to end up soon. Open the borders with all the safety protocols. Actually, Galapagos is working very hard. We are planning to open Galapagos in July, at the latest August. So all the tourism industry, it's getting together and having the protocols already established in order to get going, because we do need all that money for conservation in order to patrol our marine reserve, to be there helping the national park and stop illegal activities if they happen to be around.
It's so important in so many places around the world right now. Sometimes I think we think, oh, well, you know, we're just involved in tourism, but it's critical for so many economies and for conservation. Josy, it's been so awesome to learn from you about the incredible history of the Galapagos. I just find it absolutely fascinating. I think we got a little bit to the heart of this place and what has been happening all these years. So thank you very much. And I think, Kendall, now we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, and then for those who want to stick around, I know it's getting close to the top of the hour now, so we'll stick around for another 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. And if you have some questions for Josy, you can submit those in the control panel in the questions field. Okay, first question. How did the islands get their name, and is there a translation for Galapagos?
Yeah, actually the islands also changed, because it used to call Islas de Galapagos, something like that. And then it was called Archipiélago de Colón because of Christopher Columbus. And now it's called Islas Galapagos, you know. And Galapagos, it's supposed to be an old Spanish word for the saddle of a horse, because our islands have the saddleback shaped tortoises, have the front part as the same shape of the horse saddle. So that's how our islands got their names. And it changed also through history. And we call them right now Islas Galapagos.
Fascinating. Next question. Are rats, goats, and pigs still a problem on the islands?
Yes, I hope, we haven't found a way how to eliminate rats from bigger areas. We've been successful in eliminating rats on small islets, small surface areas, but we're working hard in order to eliminate on big islands. And goats were successfully eradicated on Isabela and Santiago Island. That's actually one of the largest part of goat eradication, because they were competing for food with the giant tortoises. And pigs were still working on that. So we're working hard in order to restore some of the ecosystems of the islands that have been damaged by these introduced animals.
Which of the islands today are inhabited by people?
That's a good question. From the 30,000 people that we live here, we have Floriana, of course, but that's actually the island that has remained with few people. It's 120 people inhabit Floriana Island. And then we have San Cristobal, that is the capital, Santa Cruz, that's actually where I happen to be right now, and Isabela Island. Those are the 4 inhabited islands of the Galapagos. The rest of it is inhabited, and where we live is not like all of the island. As I mentioned to Annie before, it's 97 is national park. So only we have a little part on each island where humans can do their activities and be owners of land.
Were some of the volcanoes, which are now dormant or extinct, were they active back when the early explorers were first inhabiting the islands?
Yes, because we still have the hotspot, and the islands have been moving according to the Nazca plate. So when the early explorers arrived, for sure they were eruptions. And nowadays, our last eruption that I was able finally to witness, it was 2 years ago or a year ago on Isabela. So yeah, Isabela and Fernandina are active, and at any time we can have those beautiful fireworks. As I always like to mention, I always crossing my fingers to get to see an eruption with my groups. It's extraordinary.
Someone has a request that you let us know again which island was the U.S. Air Base on.
Baltra. Baltra is in the northern side of Santa Cruz. So that was the air base there. And nowadays, there is people living there, but it's only the Air Force people. So we kind of count it and do not count it as an inhabited island. That people, it changes every 3 months and goes back to the mainland.
And someone was curious about when whalers were active there, if that changed the behavior of the animals during that time.
During that time, they mainly went to get tortoises. And whalers and pirates were also smart, because they went to the islands where tortoises were nearby the shoreline, right? Because we have islands that have highlands, and we have islands that are pretty flat, and tortoises happen to be closer and easier access. So they went there, and whalers and pirates, they also noticed how tame the animals were. And the good thing is that the animals are still tame until nowadays.
And speaking of animals, some people are curious if, other than giant tortoises, what are the main animals you want to see when you're there?
Okay, of course, sea lions, right? You want to play and snorkel and have the sea lion right here almost kissing your mask. You want to see the Galapagos penguins that are one of the smallest, not the smallest, there is other smallest penguins, but they are very, very little, swimming also around you, or you can enjoy them looking at the rocks. Other people likes also to see the blue-footed boobies. I don't know, blue-footed boobies are famous. They happen to be all over the Pacific. They are not endemic to the islands, but one of the things that you can see them right next to you. Sometimes actually we have to get outside of the trail a little bit because they happen to be nesting right there. So blue-footed boobies. And I would say people also likes to see the flyless cormorants.
And I think the marine iguanas. too.
Oh,
I think
yes.
people love the marine iguanas.
Yes. Yeah, the marine iguana, the one that the face of only a mother could love, right?
Yes, that's right.
Have you seen any effects from climate change?
Well, yes, things are changing here. The mating seasons of the animals are not anymore as they used to be. Of course, they will mate whenever is food availability. Areas where water was not arriving before, right now it's arriving higher, so that may cause the destruction of penguins' nest, just to give you an example. So we're having El Nino year more often, and that actually reduces the chances of the animals to recruit and be healthy again. So yeah, weather is crazy, and hopefully the animals will adapt at the same speed as the weather is changing.
And speaking of weather, when is the best time to visit, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I like always the transition months, right? Or I would say the time where people do not maybe want to come, and that depends on each one of you. If you don't tend to like hot weather, so February and March is very hot. I love it, but it's maybe 35 degrees, 100% humidity. So hot is February, March, and very, very cold is September and October. The rest of the other 8 months, it's great. Or the transition months, May, June, July, November, December, January. But in the Galapagos, all year long, you're going to see all of the animals.
Great. That's the last question for today. So I'd like to hand it back over to both of you for some closing comments, and I'll hand it over to Josy first.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us all this hour. It went a little bit more than we expected, but it was a lot of things that I wanted to share with you. And I just want to thank you, and please keep following the regulations of the government so we'll be safe, and hopefully our borders of the different countries will open and we can reunite again to travel and explore this beautiful world. I hope a lot of you will come and visit us here. Galapagos is amazing. We don't have mass tourism, and we have a small boat, so it's a perfect location. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Josy, for sharing this information with us. I cannot wait to get back to the Galapagos. It is definitely one of the most incredible places on this planet. I think people ask me a lot, what trip would you take if you could take any trip? And I would take my kids to the Galapagos for sure. So. Yeah. Thank you for sharing the history, and thank you to all of you for joining us again. We absolutely love that you're here with us, and can't wait to see you maybe not next week, but the week after. So thank you so much.
And thank you, both of you ladies. This was such an interesting presentation. People just loved all of the fascinating information you shared, Josy. And my thanks as well to everyone who joined us today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. And we did record today's presentation, so we'll have that replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.